All right, Senator Tom Cotton is with me, Senator from Arkansas, one of the leaders on so many key issues in the Senate. And Senator, it is 9/11, and we've spent much of the show, particularly this hour, reflecting on it. Tell us how the role it played in your personal journey.
Hey, Alex, it's good to be back on with you. And on this solemn anniversary, I want to first express my condolences to everyone who lost loved ones on 9/11 19 years ago. Know that we'll never forget you, and we pray for you constantly.
Amen.
Well, like so many Americans, my life took a big turn on 9/11. I remember on the morning of 9/11, I was in law school sitting in evidence class from, I think, 8:30 to 10, if I recall. And I know it'd be hard for your young listeners to understand, but back then, in the days before the flood, we didn't have Wi-Fi and we didn't have smartphones with text messages and social media. So for the first hour or so, we didn't know anything that had happened. But when we got out, we could see dozens, maybe a couple hundred students kind of gathered together with shock looks on their faces. And we learned pretty quickly that America was under attack. I think both planes had hit the World Trade Center and hit the Pentagon as well. And I remember being back in the student union just in time to see the second tower collapse. And from that day forward, my life has taken a lot of twists and turns. I was in law school, finishing up my last year, thought I was going to go on to be a lawyer. But from that day forward, I'd resolved that I wanted to serve in our military and go overseas to defend America and defend our freedom. So after a couple of years of finishing school and paying off all my loans to that school, that's what I did. Ended up in the Army for almost 5 years in Iraq and Afghanistan. So it's been it was a circuitous path that was peculiar to a lot of my buddies in the military who just enlisted out of high school or went through ROTC or West Point. But it's
so how common is
life.
it? Sure. So how common is it, and it's such a stunning personal detail, how common is it for people who, you were in Harvard Law and you had been to Harvard undergrad, and how many people had, spent 7 years at Harvard and then decided, I'm going to go to the Middle East and defend our country? It seems like sometimes maybe someone will go to the Middle East and use a GI Bill and then go get a master's from Harvard or something. But you did it the opposite. I mean, that is so stunning.
I did it the opposite, and I guess you might say the less intelligent way. There's a lot, the 9/11 generation of soldiers, you're right, have gone on, especially the 9/11 GI Bill, into law schools and business schools, and they've gone on to accomplish great things in business or for the country. But most of them did it in a more normal way: get out of high school, get out of college, join the military, and then leave. In this slightly reverse way, which is probably less intelligent. But we all turned out in the end.
Yeah, it certainly did, and we're going to do in a moment here. We're going to honor a moment of silence, which at 8:46 in the a.m. Eastern Time, where American Airlines Flight 11, traveling from Boston to Los Angeles, struck the North Tower of the World Trade Center in New York City, which sparked all of the events that last and have an impact probably throughout all time. So let's do that now. We're going to pause for a moment of silence to memorialize and honor the victims of 9/11 and the War on Terror. Thanks for that, audience, and Senator Cotton, who's with me. Yeah, it's so important.
To go back to your earlier question, I will tell you a funny story. I remember on the first day of officer candidate school, I'd been in the Army for about 10 weeks at that point, so they have us crowded into this tiny little classroom. See those little desks that have the desk kind of welded into the chair itself.
Sure.
And like made for third graders with grown men and women sitting in them. We're all bunched up and it's hot. And I see the guy next to me obviously had served at the 82nd Airborne, because even though you had to take off all of your patches and badges and insignia on your uniform for officer candidate school, if you'd served previously, they'd already been bleached out by the sunshine. I said, "Oh, I see you were in the 82nd. He said, "Yeah, I was in for 2 years, you know." So did you go overseas? "Yeah, I was in Iraq." And said, "Well, what did you do before the 82nd? And he said, "I was a lawyer." I was like, "You got to be kidding me." The only two lawyers turned infantry in the Army are sitting here together, officer candidate school. But I will say, although I didn't meet many people who spent all those years at Harvard and then decided to join, I met a remarkably diverse array of young men and women who did take very unusual paths, who did give up a tremendous amount of opportunities, whether they were in business already or on an academic path at a prestigious university or working as lawyers, people who had been on active duty in the 90s, who had left but stayed in the reserves and they volunteered to mobilize. So, there are literally thousands of people who took very unusual paths in their country into the military because they were called to serve. What happened 19 years ago today.
Well, was it a tough decision, or was it something that you felt like was kind of in your bones, and you just now officially had your excuse that you said, "Okay, now I have to do it"?
No, it wasn't that tough of a decision, Alex. Really, from 9/11 forward, it was something I wanted to do. At first, it was a little bit tougher not to rush out and do it right away. I did consider that, as so many people did in the fall of 2001. But some friends of mine, friends who had been in ROTC, for instance, and gone on into the Army, or friends who had previously served in the Army, they encouraged me to take a knee and collect my thoughts, as we said in the Army, pointing out that the Army had been around for a very long time and it probably wasn't going to go anywhere. And our enemies weren't going anywhere. And if I quit law school after taking out 3 years worth of loans and not getting a degree, my loan's probably not going to go anywhere on a lieutenant salary either. So once I was clearing about $400 a month in basic training, I appreciated the point they had made. It was I will say I got impatient in the 2 or 3 years after 9/11 to get on with it. But as I said, everything worked out very well for me. It really gave me time also to grow up a little bit more and not just put financial affairs in order, but be a more mature leader as I joined the Army. We entrust our young lieutenants and young sergeants with a tremendous degree of responsibility at a very young age. I know for sure that I was a much better platoon leader in Iraq at age 29 than I would have been at age 23.
You wrote a book about your time in the Old Guard, which is the oldest Army regiment, which is called Sacred Duty, A Soldier's Tour of Arlington National Cemetery. And it's about what it's like to be at Arlington and have that be your day-to-day experience. And there's a long interview we did, maybe 40 minutes, if not a full hour, somewhere on our SoundCloud at Breitbart. So you could use your favorite non-Google search engine. I'm sure you can pull that up. So, but you were honoring our war dead as a job in the most rigorous way possible. Could you give us a little bit of what that was like, especially in a post 9/11 America?
Sure, I can, Alex. And I also point out in Sacred Duty, I describe what happened on this morning because it was Flight 77 that hit the Pentagon at about 9:35, 9:40 or so, and that is right after the first funerals of the day end in Arlington Cemetery. They start at 9 o'clock, or usually in between 9:20 and 9:40. So I described what it was like for some of the caisson platoon members who had hitched their horses to the hitching post and were waiting for the next funeral to see the airplane flying in a very unusual angle towards the Pentagon. When you're in Arlington performing funerals, you see planes flying in and out of Reagan National all day long. But obviously this plane came in at a very different angle and descended into the Pentagon, and parts of that aircraft were blown into the cemetery itself. And then for the rest of the day and really for the next month, the Old Guard, took off its ceremonial uniforms and put on its combat fatigues, and they were in the Pentagon trying to recover survivors and then recover remains, and providing security for those other first responders there. So they had been on the front lines of 9/11 from the very beginning moments of it. And then since then, especially in those early days. When I was at the cemetery in 2007, obviously we saw the terrible toll that the war was taking on our young men and women overseas. In the summer of 2007, we would probably perform anywhere from 2 to 5 funerals a day for active duty soldiers who'd been killed just a few days earlier overseas. Most of our funerals in those days were World War II veterans or Korean veterans. But obviously it's very different when you have a young widow or widower, young children who may not understand what's happening, parents as well, and you're laying to rest someone who's just given their life in defense of our nation a few days earlier. We resolved, every soldier there from the very beginning, you got a sense of what an incredible honor it was and what a duty it was to be on your very best performance every single day. Because even though we might perform 20 funerals a day, for those families, that was the last moment they were going to have with their loved one, with the Army honoring their service and their sacrifice. And we held ourselves to the highest degree of perfection because those loved ones and their fallen heroes deserve nothing less. And it's really a reflection of what the nation feels for them. We were doing that for ourselves as comrades in arms, but more than anything, we were there as representatives of the American people and our nation to honor the finest among us for paying the ultimate sacrifice.
Yeah, and that's exactly where I was going to go with this, which comes so clear, that comes through so clearly in the book, is that even though for you it is your job and you are working these funerals, but for the people who are there, it is one of the most profound moments of their life, and a solemn one at that, and you have to honor that every second of the way. And it is taken so seriously, and this is one thing where I look back on lessons that maybe we are beginning to forget. And one thing that the Old Guard is all about is excellence. And I do feel like we used to value excellence at a little higher rate in this country. And I don't like that we're losing that to some degree. If there's one thing that, and I don't want to be too negative, that's not really the point of the occasion, but it is something that I'm wary of, that we're losing, I think, sight of that. And I think that was what the Old Guard stood for, is not just even excellence, as you say, it's perfection. It's the way your uniform is. The way your uniform is, the way your gun moves while you march. I mean, everything is to a T, and we strive for that. Are we striving for that now as a country, or are we getting more lackadaisical?
Well, we ought to be, and that's the standard to which we should hold ourselves in every walk of life, whether you're in the military, Old Guard or in the other unit, or whether you're an elected leader or in business or in the way you raise your children. Obviously, we're all imperfect and flawed, but the standard the Old Guard sets really is a good standard for us all to strive by. And as I said, even though you perform 20 funerals a day, for every funeral you got on site and you did a quick rehearsal in advance. Even though you had just performed that funeral 45 minutes earlier, after every funeral, you gathered together the key leaders and you took stock of your performance to note even the smallest deficiencies, even the most minor imperfections that no one among the mourners could have possibly noticed, because we held ourselves to that true standard of excellence. It is very hard to ever meet in any kind of performance, any kind of activity, that standard of perfection. But if you aim for it, you're certainly going to be doing much better than if you accept something less as your standard.
Tom Cotton, Senator from Arkansas, and war veteran as well. And let's compare and contrast the last question for today. We're in a crisis probably the biggest since 9/11 in the country, with the pandemic and the fallout. And one thing that we all did after 9/11 is we were all unified. We were all together. We were all standing as one. Now, not so much. Could you compare and contrast that? And is there anything that we can learn from 9/11 that maybe we could start drafting off of today?
Yeah, it is a notable contrast that for the days and for the months after 9/11, that we were fairly unified as a nation. Even our political leaders, who had severe differences of opinion when it came to the direction of the country on so many questions, were relatively unified. You can look at public opinion polls. Even though we had just lost 3,000 Americans in the first attack on American soil since Pearl Harbor, first attack in more than 200 years on the continental United States, Americans felt more confident and more optimistic about the future of their country than they had any time previously in my lifetime. I think that's unfortunately been lacking. no one in America is responsible for the pandemic we faced. Plenty of leaders, Democrat and Republican alike, have had missteps in it. We've tried to correct those to improve conditions. Who's ultimately responsible, though, as it was on 9/11, is a foreign adversary. This time it's the Chinese Communist Party. That time it's al-Qaeda. And I think it would be healthy for us to recognize.
Yeah, sadly, we got to leave it there, but I really appreciate everything you do. We'll have you back soon.